get as many eyeballs on your email list as possible and drive as much clicks as possible to the website.
That kind of big change was made from Google. It's wreaked havoc, I
The
think.
first thing I avoid is going to what the attribution revenue is.
Buying window for e-commerce has got shorter and shorter.
List size still matters. Like, you can easily burn through the list if your list is not growing.
Hello and welcome back to the StoreHero podcast. This week we are joined by Josh Blackburn, founder and CEO of Blackburn Digital. Josh is a longtime friend and an excellent email marketer. Today during the podcast we discuss the biggest opportunities for brands during BFCM, the real topic of deliverability for brands. We discuss how much segmentation is too much segmentation and some of the lowest hanging fruit for brands as we head into peak season. I think you're really going to enjoy this one. Morning, and this week we are back with Josh. Josh, good morning. How are you getting on this morning?
I'm all good, thanks buddy. I'm all good. Thanks for having me on.
No worries. Where are you dialing in from today?
London. So turning from London, and you're accompanied by Spider-Man in the back voice. So you got two of us today.
Two of you, yeah. Very good, very good. Obviously, Josh, we're not far away from peak season. I suppose, look, it's obviously a really pressing time of the year. I think this buying window for e-commerce has got shorter and shorter. A lot of the brands we even see at StoreHero, they're doing 50% of the revenue in Q4, and even within that time period, like the lion's share of that revenue is done within a 6-week period. What are some of the biggest brands? What are some of the biggest opportunities for brands as it kind of pertains to retention, email marketing coming up into BFCM, and what could they do now to help them improve what's about to happen over the next couple of weeks?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing they can do is start putting the focus of how can we engage as much of our audience on our list as possible. So it's quite normal for like times leading up to Black Friday that brands see a slower sales period because customers know Black Friday's coming along. It's why I think Black Friday is getting earlier and earlier. Like, I think one day we're going to hit April and we're having Black Friday. But I think one of the biggest things that brands can do this time of year is thinking, okay, how can we get as many people as possible engaging with our emails? One way instantly as a takeaway I like to do is a simple competition email, something very simple. Send it out to your list, send it out, start engaging people, click this to enter, make the prize something that's really worth people engaging with. And just from a psychology perspective, it just gets people engaging with your website, with your emails again, and it just sends some really good engagement, positive trust to the email domains that are going to get crucified during this period. So I think that's the biggest thing people can do right now to prep for what's coming, to get as many eyeballs on their emails as possible.
Okay, we'll touch on the deliverability piece in a while because it's definitely one I'm eager to dive into. In terms of the competition piece, so you kind of mentioned do something attractive, something that people will actually be interested in. Have you any examples of brands that have done this quite well in the past? Because I agree with you. I think it's so important. And again, it's just a little cognitive thing that if you can build it into people's brains, okay, that was, ABC brand. They got me to open an email and actually interact with it in the last couple of weeks. Therefore, as these emails start peppering into my inbox in the next couple of weeks, hopefully I'll be a little bit more engaged to look at that kind of brand's email. So what are some of the best kind of competition campaigns that you've seen work, and maybe how can brands utilize them?
So I think the best ones I've seen are the ones that make it really easy to engage. So I think I try and avoid around this time of year. The ones I don't really like are the ones where you've got to do something to enter. In my opinion, it's not that time of year to do that. It's not, hey, share your story about how our product changed your life and we'll enter you in a competition to get £500. It's not the time and place. The best ones for me are the ones that make the prize very attractive, because potentially a lot of other people are doing this. I know Black Friday's coming anyway. So maybe take your biggest bundle that a product has and be like, look, we're giving away this biggest bundle. I would say make it like that and make it very simple. So the ones I do with my clients and the ones I like are very simple. Click to enter. We usually then redirect them to the website with a little thank you message, you've been entered. And it serves as a win-win. It gets them back onto the website, which from an email marketing perspective is our number one goal in most cases. Get them onto that website, get them re-familiar with the brand. But it also is getting them back into the habit of engaging with your brand. And if you want to take it a step further, you might want to even separate your normal engaged audience, and maybe you want to make an audience that was Black Friday shoppers last year that maybe haven't come back, but they always come back around Black Friday time, just to treat them and see how it differs and get as many people engaged as possible.
Yeah, that makes sense. So you're talking about really segmenting that email as well. It's not just a batch and blast to everybody.
No, never bash and blast. I do think in this instance, you want to try and hit as many people as possible. So at this time, this might be when I take a few more risks as an email marketer, not from a perspective that will ruin deliverability right before the main time, but from experience, normally competition emails, as long as you're excluding spam emails, deadweight emails, bounced emails, usually these emails are always get quite a good response. So I would say, how can you reach maximum eyeballs with minimum resource and get as much impact for the brand as possible, I'd say.
Josh, you've worked with loads of different brands. Obviously, we've known each other for quite a while at this stage. When you're looking to onboard a new client, what are the top three things maybe that you're looking at to gauge where the health of I'm guessing it's in most cases Klaviyo, but in the email account in general, what are the three kind of things that you would look at to say, this account is great, there's loads of opportunity here, or this account is really not in good shape, which inherently means there is a lot of opportunity here again.
Yeah, so I'd say the first thing I avoid is going to what the attribution revenue is. That's the thing I don't do. And the reason being is because in my experience, I've seen accounts now that have really good attribution but are missing a lot of fundamentals, and accounts that actually don't have per se a great attribution percentage but are actually solid email accounts. So I don't go straight to that. I think firstly, deliverability, get an idea at the top level in Klaviyo or the ESP. What is this deliverability looking like? The click rate, the open rate, the spam, the unsubscribes. In most cases, a lot of the brands I come into haven't got Google Postmaster or domain level deliverability, so we haven't got that to go into straight away. That's number one. The next thing I'm really fascinated about is getting an idea of what's the list growth rate. And I know this year it's been a big point of our list size don't matter no more. It's about the quality of the list. List size still matters. Like you can easily burn through the list if your list is not growing. So it's a really good indication for me of what's going on the acquisition standpoint. If I go into account and say, yeah, do you know what? They're bringing in a lot of emails. It's growing nicely. There's a lot of people coming onto the email list. And I think third one is then going into the welcome flow and getting an understanding of, right, of all the people coming into that list, what's the subscription to conversion rate? How many prospects are they converting and getting product into hands? Those are the first three because I think they're the top level. You can go into a band checkout as well and get an idea of that. But for me, it's instantly how can I get that biggest number, top level that has the most impact? And that normally gives me a really good idea of where the account could be at.
Just on I suppose you touched on an interesting point there, the welcome series and the subscription to purchase rate. Where do you like one trap I see a lot of StoreHero users fall into is that they can be giving anywhere from 15 to 20% off, welcome 15, welcome 20, and there's definitely an inbuilt hesitation or fear of turning that campaign off or reducing that discount because it's driving so much revenue.
Yeah.
Now, we've kind of started to run some A/B tests with some clients and say, can we go to that competition piece? Enter here for a competition. Where do you stand, or what are going to be some of the best welcome emails and I suppose welcome offers that you've seen to try and to incentivize list growth, I suppose?
Really interesting because, like, personally, I try and avoid the competition one. Just from tests I've done, it can build up a lower quality audience because people maybe ain't want to buy. I think for me, it's so dependent on the brand. I think the main goal is how do we get product into hands? That's the main thing I care about. How we best do that, we can work with the brand on. I've worked with brands that are like, yep, give 20%. We need product into hands. Let's go from there. I've worked with brands where they're like, look, Josh, we're not a discount brand. That's really important to us, but we're happy to try a free gift. So if you spend £70, we'll give them a free gift just to change the narrative. But for me, from experience, I think the offer and the discount does have the biggest impact. Just from a really realistic perspective, is a lot of brands now are in industries where there's a lot of brands offering the same. In D2C and e-commerce world now, it's very rare to find a brand where it's like, do you know what? You've got a real USP there. Like, this product is really unique. And the con with that, it's just customers have choice. And when customers have choice, you've got that minute moment of their attention that you can either choose to get your product into their hands and increase the chances of retention, or not do anything, and they're probably going to go to competitor B, C, or D. So I think for me, I do see the discounts work the best, but you can find ways of making that more profitable for brands, definitely.
I think it's so important to make sure the discount is baked in because like
Yeah,
a lot of brands will, do their numbers and then use a discount on top of that to incentivize and drive revenue growth. But that discount hasn't been priced in day one. So I think to
100%.
your point, it really depends brand on brand. But just ensuring that those kind of numbers are done obviously in the back end is just crucially important. What are some of the biggest or some of the lowest hanging fruit that you would typically see with a D2C brand, particularly from a Klaviyo perspective?
Oh, good question. I think the first one is in most cases, they're probably not capturing zero party data on the front end. That's been like the buzzword of this year and last year.
Just
Like,
explain that one for a second for some of our
sure.
listeners who might not be familiar with it.
So essentially, zero party data is data that your customer gives you about themselves. So it might be you go onto the website, a pop up comes up, and it might be, hey, get 10% today and let us know your number one skincare goal. And you might have some options like, I want to get rid of my acne or I want brighter skin. But customers are giving that to you. Where that's different to what people might see first party data is first party data. I always think of Google Analytics data we're capturing from people by how they use something, but they're not giving that to us themselves. And then third party data would be Facebook ads, what those platforms are giving. But I think the one thing that is the lowest hanging fruit is it allows us to understand what is the customer's purpose of being here, what is their goal. And there's different kinds you can capture, but I'd say 9 out of 10 brands I audit don't have that in place.
Really?
I would say so. And I think one thing I've noticed is I think the awareness of zero party data is getting better.
Hmm.
But I think the next phase is understanding, well, A, what questions do I ask? Because that's a very overwhelming thing. But B, how do I use the data? So if I've got 7 answers, do I need to make 7 different emails? And I think that's the next phase where people are getting like, what do I do here? But I would say that's been the biggest thing, and that can help improve that subscription to conversion rate. How can we get new customers product into hands? A live example I've got is I was doing an audit for a men and women's sportswear brand. Think Gymshark, but not Gymshark, that kind of vibe. And people were coming onto the site and they were giving a discount, a pop up, but that was it. So then when you go into their welcome flow, it's like, well, do they want women or men? Suddenly they're getting both. Are they interested in outdoor clothing or gym clothing? Because so as a customer, it's like I'm getting this very generic welcome flow, and that can be tailored a lot better. And I think the second biggest lowest hanging fruit is stick the discount code at the end of the pop up. It's so much easier for the customer experience, and you get I mean, attribution revenue. We could talk about that all day. I'm sure but the biggest lie is if I have to go into the email just to get the code, that email is not driven that revenue. Like if we're being totally honest, so it just allows us to have a little bit more accuracy in that reporting as well.
What are you using to collect zero party data?
Well, good question. So for me, it will be 2 different options at the minute. Either Klaviyo, just the Klaviyo form internally, if brands want to keep it cheap, expensive. The difficulty with Klaviyo at the minute is more of a basic form, so it doesn't have logic mapping, etc. Or I usually send clients to FormThorough because that gives that data as well of like people that have answered this. This is the conversion rate. But usually it depends on the brand's budget appetite. Depends on what way I go.
Okay, perfect. And obviously, FormToro would be integrated directly with Klaviyo, I would imagine.
Yeah, so basically it's its own software, kind of like StoreHero. It have its own backend, but then it just easily integrates with Klaviyo. It sends over all the zero-party data answers that you can segment and you can build out your flows. So not, I'd say, a smooth process from an integration standpoint.
Makes sense. Boost conversion rate, much more personalized and tailored experience for the end user as well. No, absolutely. Josh, we kind of briefly touched on it, but deliverability, since probably March or April of this year, whenever that kind of big change was made from Google, it's wreaked havoc, I think, for a lot of
Yeah,
brands.
yeah.
Unfortunately. Do you want to just explain to me what happened there, first of all, and how big of an issue is it, and how big of an impact do you think it's going to actually happen on BFCM this year?
Yeah, so I think essentially what happened was Google basically sat down and thought, you know what, we're going to make it we're going to get a lot tougher with our expectations of getting into your customer's inbox. So they made a lot more of an aggressive spam rate. If you were going over the spam rate, you're going to find it a lot easier to go into spam. And then the DMARC records came out as well, that became an essential for brands. A simple change, some brands still don't have it, but I'd say most brands have done that now. But I think the trend of what happened is a lot of the inbox providers are basically just saying, look, if you want to get into our inbox for your customers, you need to be really high quality because we're not going to let any rubbish come through now. This challenge is deliverability is getting harder, but brands' perspectives around deliverability and how they do it is still from 4 years ago. So I audit brands now that the deliverability practices they're doing would have been a struggle for the expectations of 2 years ago, let alone now. And I think coming back to your answer about Black Friday, the less eyeballs we have on our emails, the less sales. And the less sales, as we've said, we're getting to a point where Q4 for a lot of brands is a lot of revenue. And it's getting to a scary place. It's kind of like in stock market when they realize that this whole thing is based off of 3 brands. And if those 3 brands go, this whole thing collapses. And we're in that situation where it's getting very one little error.
The big short.
Yeah, exactly.
Interesting. So, you mentioned like a lot of the brands, their deliverability structural setup could be fit for purpose of like 4 years ago. There's been a huge change. I think the brands that haven't realized that change will really realize it probably over the next 4 weeks.
Yeah.
Why haven't they taken the time to figure it out? Is it complex or, it seems like very obvious low-hanging fruit. What's been the blocker? Why have brands not done this?
I'd say, in fairness, that's a valid point. It is more of the complex part of email marketing for sure. Something that can be seen as quite a straightforward marketing channel. It's definitely the more complicated one. But mate, honestly, it's just not sexy. And anything that's not sexy and it's like, oh God, I have to do that, it's always the last choice. And I repeatedly see that. Like you'll notice, mate, like LinkedIn this year, it's been given the birth of email designs. Everywhere we look, people are posting email designs and, oh, I've changed this email from this design to that design. And when I jump on discovery and sales calls, the question I get asked is, oh, have you got examples of designs you've done for past clients? Mate, no one asks me, have you got any examples of how you've improved a brand's deliverability rate? And I just think it's one of those things, it won't be taken seriously until brands are in the gutter and they're like, what is happening here? Especially if they're not working with experts that are in the weeds every day with it.
Let's just dig into that one. So that I'm actually really interested in that. So
Yeah.
like, let's just take 1 or 2 brands where maybe the deliverability setup was, fit for purpose 4 years ago. You've come in this year and changed them. Do you have any stats or numbers around like what the change is actually meant for that brand in terms of where they were at and versus where they're at now?
It's a good question. I'd say in a weird way, it usually leads to a smaller email list. First off, if we're looking at stats, we usually see a drop in email list because of dead emails. I'd say I've seen, if we implement like good email types and stuff, we've seen click rates go from might be 0.5% to 1.5%, 2% plus, better open rates. That is relative because it's going to a smaller audience. And I always want to stress that. So you naturally will get a higher percentage click rate because it's gone to a smaller audience, but that's better signals. But I'd say the biggest one is drop in spam rate and unsubscribe rate and bounce rate. I've gone into brands before that have had spam rates of like 1% plus, and it's just disgusting, and it's really bad, really nervy. And it's usually because they've got overlapping audiences, they're emailing the whole list, they're not properly segmenting the list. I would say with the changes we make, we see the biggest impact in the negative metrics that bring it down, that send more positive signals to the email providers.
I'm curious on the numbers. I know you can't give me specifics or exact, but let's just take a brand where we've shrunk the email list down to, let's just keep it really simple, 100.
Yeah.
The click-through rate has gone from 0.5 to 2%. The list size has shrunk, and obviously this will be different case by case, but ballpark, what would that list have shrunk down to from, assuming we're at 1,000 now, would it have gone from 2,000 to 1,000? would have been like 1,500 to 1,000. Where like how much of a drop in list growth are we talking about? Ballpark.
I'd say a good chance is sometimes as high as 40%.
40%. Wow.
Sometimes high as 40%, depending on how well kept. I've taken over accounts that have had maybe another agency doing it and it's cleaner because they've done best practices. But I took on a brand recently, and I'd say nearly half their email list were dead emails. And the biggest, one of the biggest reasons this comes in is they'll usually do a competition with another brand where maybe that email list hasn't really given consent to join that list. So they've added in another 10,000 emails. None of them have opened, none of them have engaged, or they've added a spam. So I'd say it can be as high as half.
But even on that back of the napkin maths, the absolute number of clicks, even though the list size has shrunk, the absolute number of clicks is like more than double there,
Yeah,
which is fantastic.
yeah. Because it's kind of one of those ones where you're emailing people that ain't going to open anyway. And the idea would be that if we start boosting those metrics, it will go into more of the correct email placement, so more people see it. So like a little tactic that people can do now is if they're in Klaviyo, a Klaviyo client, for example, just to give them something to take away, if they do a report to see at the email domain level, Gmail, Apple, Microsoft, you might even want to target specific domains to improve it. So I had a client once where their Microsoft domain, and Microsoft is usually always the horrible one in most cases.
Really?
I'd say so. Microsoft can always be a killer. I'd say it's always the lowest one. It's always showing design issues and stuff. The average open rate for the account was around 50%, and average click rate was around 2. But when we looked at Microsoft, the open rate was at 25%, and the click rate was at 0.8. So that was quite a clear layer of, right, we've got an issue with this particular domain and mailbox. Let's exclude that from future campaigns and go back to basics with this inbox and slowly but surely build up trust again. In most cases, it's usually that kind of scenario. They've got an issue with one particular mailbox that's bringing everything down.
Interesting. I wasn't actually aware that Microsoft was as poorly, performing as other mailboxes, but that's really, really interesting and great to know. Obviously, we're coming into, this will be released next week, but really, really, really busy time of year. People are obviously setting up their different cohorts and segments, all that kind of thing. When we're talking about email marketing, how much segmentation is too much segmentation? Does it depend on the size of the brand, list size? Yeah, I often speak to really small merchants in the scheme of things that, from the outside perspective, I think have far too much segmentation done. And while it's great, there's an awful lot of work that needs to go into creating all those segments and different types of email, design, copy for all those. So ballpark, I know it's a really hard question to answer, but how much segmentation is too much segmentation?
No, I think it's really valid. So I have clients that are under $1 million a year, smaller clients, and a lot of the time with them, it's just, look, 180-day engaged. How do we increase that? Let's get as many emails out to that audience. Let's not do people that bought this product and this product together. For sure, I think for smaller brands, you're 100% right. Maximum eyeballs for as minimum resource we can, because the list just doesn't matter to it. The brand that I audited or done a call with recently that was more of an 8-figure brand, now for them it's a different story because they're emailing at such scale. It may become different. It might be that you want to segment between men's clothes and women's clothes. It might mean that you want to create a segment of the best engaged audience segments, and you might want to create one that maybe want to break or ain't engaging as much. But in most cases, mate, I think segmentation gets too complicated. I would say as big as you can email, 180-day engage is a quite standard one. Get as many eyeballs on your email list as possible and drive as much clicks as possible to the website. I'd say with segmentation, the only one that I think people need to put more effort into is the exclusion side of segmentation. So making sure you're excluding spam, making sure you're excluding bounced emails, potentially excluding people that have recently purchased, and exclude people that are in flows. If someone's in the welcome flow for a particular goal, you don't want them getting your campaigns. It's two different journeys. You see on LinkedIn, people say one big thing that's come up a lot this year is, you should send campaigns to prospects and another campaign to one-time customers and another campaign to repeat customers. Any email I send to prospects usually performs really badly because it's people that have never bought the product, and that's just the natural law of things. So you want to be careful with how you segment in those segment groups as well.
Where do you stand on people running paid ads simply to drive emails?
Or I think, okay, so I'm 50-50 with it. I've seen it work and I've seen it not work. I think as long as you've set yourself up for safeguarding it, it's fine. So, for example, a brand that I was with recently were doing that, and they were sending all Facebook leads into the generic welcome flow. So suddenly it's very hard to tell how successful was that. So if you're going to do it, separate the flows that they're going into so you can measure it at a flow level. And I think test it. I think we're in a world now where test, you never know what works. But I think if you can see clearly that we've brought on 10,000 emails in the last 6 months, 2 of them have bought. Clearly it's either not working or you've got a bigger problem. With D2C, I rarely see it work. But
Really?
I've rarely seen it work at a point of better than sending them to a product page, for example, or a dedicated landing page that's speaking to that product. But there's always worlds where it will work, of course.
Of course, of course. No, really, really interesting, Josh. Okay, we might move on to the kind of quick fire round. Just going to fire a couple of quick questions at you here. So,
Okay, man.
if you were to start, obviously you've worked with loads of different brands at this stage. I'm sure you've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly. But if you were to start a D2C brand in the morning, what would it be?
I think I'd have to go. This year I've become really fascinated more with my health and my gut health. I've been learning loads more about fiber and my gut health. And getting your daily amount of fiber is super hard. Like, you're either in the kitchen for hours or you need a farm. Just pop out to your farm.
Slam Weetabix first thing in the morning.
Yeah, I'd love to see if there was a subscription service that helped people get their adequate amount of fiber, but not using all the shit and rubbish stuff people are chucking into stuff these days, like chemicals, gum, all this stuff. I think because I'm going through that journey currently of trying to improve my gut health, and I always said if I ever started another D2C brand, I'd want it to be something where I was the customer as well. You know, that I was like, oh, do you know what? Like, I'm living this. I need this help. I think that would be it for me. Yeah.
I mean, I think if you have an innate interest in whatever you're trying to build, it just makes the harder it is that bit easier, for sure. I like the subscription piece, the model as well. I think that would really, really work. So interesting. Any good books or podcast recommendations?
Be business related or anything related?
No, anything at all.
Best book I've read this year was a book called Ultra Processed Foods, and it goes along the lines of that's been my year this year.
There's a theme here.
But it's a brilliant book. Like, it basically dives into how, you know how when you go into supermarkets now and you see food and it's got the rainbow of green, 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 red. It's basically a book saying that that's actually so inaccurate because of the amount of rubbish they're putting in these foods, and what we actually need to I used to think that if you bought cheese, it's processed and processed food is bad. But they was actually saying that actually there's a group for ultra processed. This is the one you want to avoid, which is what I took from the book. I'm getting to that point now where I'm starting to take my health a lot more seriously. So the balance of reading business books and health books is starting to even out a bit for me now.
Any good podcast recommendations?
I love the guys that are, I think, is it the Common Thread Collective?
Yeah.
Super smart guys. That I think from a marketing world perspective,
Brilliant.
I always learn something from them. I think they're one of like the main players for me. I think.
Yeah, I would say they're probably the best kind of content creators in this space within e-commerce marketing. They're exceptional. I listen to them quite a lot as well, and definitely learned so much from them in the last kind of 12 to 24 months, I suppose, really. So completely echo that one for sure.
You know, one of those podcasts you read, you think, I really don't know much. You know, one of those. That's what it's been like. And I was like, interesting.
100%. If you weren't working on Blackburn Digital and you had to work for somebody, anybody in the world, dead or alive, who would it be and why?
Do you know what? I'd have to go Walt Disney.
Walt Disney, interesting.
Walt Disney. One, it was just such a big part of my childhood. And like, I'm just like, from a creative standpoint, I work a lot with data. And I'm quite an analytical and data guy. And I'd be fascinated to work with and inside a company that's 90% creative, you know, and it completely changes the way you've got to think of stories and create. And I just feel like you'd learn so many frameworks in that environment that you could apply to anything in life. And it would be great to like watch a Pixar, a Disney movie, and be like, I was involved in that.
Class. No, interesting. That's a really good pick. Really good pick. What is your top prediction for 2025? I'm going to leave this one quite broad.
Yeah, no, I'd say there's two. I'll bring one back to deliverability because I think I've got. So we've got to a point with meta ads and paid social ads where people have now like accepted that creative is probably the biggest driving force of this. And now people are saying that we need to, whatever our budget is, a portion of that needs to go to creative. If we're spending 10K, we need to put 30% towards creative. I think we're going to move down a path where that becomes the same with deliverability, with email marketing. I think brands are going to need to start portioning off a portion of budget specifically for deliverability, whether that's just bringing in experts, whether that's buying tools to do proper testing. I think that's one thing we're going to see more of. And I think the more broader one, I think more, how would I say, more influencer-based brands be born. I think the last few years with Kim Kardashian Skims, with Selena Gomez's recent success with Rare Beauty, I think we're seeing a real trend of people that are in, the limelight, creating brands of their own. And I feel like that will naturally feed through to influencers and people with their own audiences, because I think influencer marketing is going to change a lot with AI. I think brands can't afford to pay influencers as much as they did. So I think we're going to see a trend of, when I started in e-commerce in 2013, the trend was indie brands being built, that brands like L'Oreal would just buy to find a niche. And I feel like the next trend is going to be influencer-based brands or people with audience-based brands. And I think it's going to go down that route, in my opinion.
I completely agree. I think it's quite a linked topic, really, I suppose. But the cost of advertising for brands has just gone through the roof, and that, if you were looking for one advantage in your business, it would be to not have to spend the money that most brands have to spend on acquiring new customers. And if you have that massive sea of engaged organic customers, it's, in my opinion, the biggest advantage that you could have in trying to scale a DTC brand in a world of ever increasing ad costs. So I completely echo that point, and I really agree with you on that one for sure. I see an awful lot more of that, and I definitely think, as you said, the other point as well, that brands can't afford to pay influencers the fees that they are commanding. And being honest about it, I don't think they're as effective as they were a couple of years ago when they were a lot cheaper. So like, you were getting much better bang for your buck in terms of what you were actually paying the influencer, 4 years ago. But the trust I think influencers had in order to drive sales to brands was much higher than what it is today.
Yeah.
There's so many influencers that you just scroll through your feed now and see them promoting X, Y, and Z. And I think people have copped onto that as well. I just don't think they're as effective. And unfortunately, they're not as effective, and the cost to have them actually work with your brand has gone north as well. So I think those two things will just put a squeeze on that market overall. And, going back to that original point, I think just as a result of that, a lot of the influencers are going to realize that they have a huge advantage at their hand and will start launching their own brands, which is going to be a really, really exciting time for everybody as well.
Yeah, in my head, like looking in the famous world, like for me, it's like if Sydney Sweeney created a brand tomorrow, skyrocket, like surely, and like that will feed through. But like what you said about people just not trusting it as much, I was bringing it back to that UPF, ultra processed food stuff. The author of that book was on the Diary of the CEO. And I was like, oh, brilliant. Like, it was an amazing book. I'll read that. And bear in mind, this book was all about putting rubbish in products that shouldn't be in it. And halfway through, we got an ad from a product that was just full of UPF. And I was like, I don't know how that mirrors up. So I think from
You
my
probably know the product you're on about.
yeah,
It's always on there.
I want to say just in case they become a customer one day. But yeah, it's one of those ones where I think you'll know who's got the authentic audiences by the success of their businesses. If there's not a real audience there, the business idea will flop, I think.
Josh, listen, thank you so much for coming on. Really enjoyed that. Tons of value in that kind of quick 30-35 minutes. So just want to say a massive thanks to everyone. And I will drop the link to your website, your LinkedIn, down below in the show notes. But if people are looking to get in contact with you, where can they find you?
Yeah, sure. So I'm active on LinkedIn and just started a YouTube channel. So like I'd love to get to 100 subscribers one day. So I'm on YouTube, and then blackburndigital.com. You can find me there, or on my socials, just Josh Blackburn, and I should come up somewhere.
Brilliant. Listen, Josh, thank you very, very much. Really looking forward to getting this one out.
See you later, buddy. Cheers, mate.